Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. A comic book published in Italy by Argentine creators that was then adapted into a cartoon by a Canadian production company hiring a Japanese animation studio. Today we're going to talk about Cybersix, a bit of a cult classic, you could call it, that still captured the imaginations of readers and viewers all throughout the world, even in the US, where allegedly it was plagiarized by filmmaker James Cameron. But is that true? Well, we're going to talk about the comic, the creators, the adaptations, and yes, even the lawsuit involving Cybersix. Hang on. Cybersix is a comic book series created by Argentine creators Carlos Meglia and Carlos Trillo. It follows the story of a genetically engineered woman known as Cybersix, who escaped from her creator and assumes the identity of a male high school literature teacher named Adrian Seidelman in the fictional city of Meridiana in Argentina. She is forced to feed on other genetically engineered creatures to stay alive. The comic was originally published in the Italian anthology comic Scorpio from May of 1991 through July of 1994 as 12-page installments, and then continued as 45 issues with 96 pages each from November of 94 through January of 1999. Scorpio started in Argentina in 1974 and ended in 1996. An Italian edition of that began in 1977. There were Spanish editions published in Spain and Argentina, as well as French translations for France. There are no official English translations so far. I wouldn't have been able to make this episode without fan translations, and they've gotten a lot better and better over the years. I would recommend checking out the Cybersix subreddit. There's a user there called Magenta Hamster who has both linked to a number of great translations and done an incredible amount of translation work themselves. So kudos to those people for helping make something available to those of us who are not fluent in Italian, French, Spanish. Thank you. The first several issues of Cybersix establish the characters and plot. The comic begins with Adrian Seidelman teaching students literature. One of his students, Lori, slips him a note explicitly hitting on him, which Adrian ignores. Lori's male friends later corner Adrian to rough him up, but he's saved by Lucas Amato. Lucas is a new teacher who also says he's a scientific journalist, but has to teach to pay the bills. Lucas notices Adrian has a book by the Portuguese poet Pessoa, as well as books on biology, two subjects Lucas is passionate about. They become friends because Adrian offers to translate Pessoa for Lucas, and Lucas talks about a mysterious woman that he's photographed at night that he thinks is somehow genetically enhanced. Interestingly, I was never 100% sure when I was reading these comics whether Lucas and Adrian teach high schoolers or college students. Maybe it's more clear in the original Italian editions. From what I was reading, I just was never 100% sure. There's a lot of depth to these comics, even though it's highly stylized. For instance, the idea of these two bonding over Pessoa, that's a real poet who wrote under fictional aliases. He had different identities. Well, that's what Cybersix is all about. On top of that, we've got some traditional superhero tropes. We've got a bit of a love triangle, as Lucas is really interested in this mysterious woman that he's taking pictures of at night without realizing that he's befriended that same person as his coworker. The Cybersix comic features a lot of the character Cybersix thinking to herself at night that she isn't human in existential soliloquies. Later issues feature a flashback that reveal Cybersix was one of 5,000 genetically enhanced creations of Dr. von Richter, a surviving member of the Nazi Schutzstaffel who fled to Argentina after World War II. Von Richter tends to remain in the background, building genetically enhanced creations to conquer the world and also capture Cybersix. Issue 5 reveals the Cyber series weren't completely obedient, so von Richter ordered their destruction. A slave at von Richter's compound overheard this and helped a young Cybersix escape. She keeps a photo of him and thinks of him as her father. Eventually, von Richter's men found and killed her father. Cybersix escaped and came across a car crash. She decided to take on the identity of the deceased child, Adrian Seidelman. Other creations of von Richter include the Data series, which are animals. Data 7 is a panther sent to kill Cybersix, but they realize that the panther has the brain of Cybersix's brother, Cyber 29, who was in a terrible accident as a child. Thought dead, von Richter actually moved his brain into Data 7, but Data 7 rebels and becomes Cybersix's ally. Von Richter also creates the Technos, which resemble people and are interspersed into the world with the goal of getting into positions of power. Cybersix feeds on them like a vampire to get sustenance, which keeps her alive. Another creation are Types, which have higher intelligence and strength. They're essentially the next iteration of Cybers that are also more loyal. And finally, there are Fixed Ideas, which are hulking brutes used for their muscle, but who can only follow simple commands. Despite the names, von Richter's creations are all biological. They are not robots or cyborgs. Cybersix allows von Richter to send his minions after her so that she has an ongoing food source, but she does not take any real steps to track him down and stop him. The comic ended abruptly in 1999 due to a disagreement between the writer, artist, and publisher. Cybersix is interesting because it uses some comic tropes, like a grim superhero brooding on rooftops at night, but also subverts other tropes. For instance, there's the love triangle between Cybersix, Lucas, and Adrian, which mirrors the Superman-Lois Lane triangle, but subverts it by having Cybersix hide her identity as a male character. And I think that's intentional. Lucas calls himself a journalist, just like Lois Lane. But the comic book also moved its plot forward by eventually getting past the secret identity and progressing Lucas and Cybersix's relationship. In fact, Cybersix spends an arc pregnant, and the characters do have a child. If you want to read this comic, you're going to have to put in a little work. You can either look at the various wikis online to figure out the order of the issues that were published in different languages like Spanish, Italian, French, or you're going to have to look into fan translations for English, and you could probably look for that on sites like Reddit. But I do think that it will be rewarding if you find this comic because it's action-packed, it's heavily stylized, it's got all sorts of cool ideas. Let's talk about the creators that gave life to Cybersix. Carlos Meglia was the artist of Cybersix. Born in Argentina in 1957, he began working in comics by 1974 as an assistant to artist Oswald Sanson on anthologies like Scorpio and Pendulum. In 1984, he transitioned to working on animation for shows like Smurfs and Scooby-Doo. In 1987, he began working with writer Carlos Trillo on a comic called Irish Coffee about a supernatural detective. After Cybersix ended in 1999, Meglia illustrated several American comic books, including Superman, Elektra, Star Wars, and Wildcats. He passed away from a heart attack at only age 50 back in 2008. Writer Carlos Trillo was born in Argentina even earlier in 1943. He was writing by age 20 in publications like Paparazzo magazine. He passed away in 2011 while on vacation in London. The two worked well together. Trillo based the idea of von Richter experimenting on human embryos after learning about the 1984 case of the embryos left behind by Mario and Elsa Rios. They were a California couple that died in a plane crash in Chile. There was a debate over whether the embryos should be kept or destroyed that captured the world's attention. Ultimately, those embryos were destroyed, but it gave Trillo the idea of an escaped Nazi doctor experimenting on them. The tone of the book is somber. It has action, but it's sad. Cybersix has lost people she cares about, like her father and her brother. She hides her identity using a dead boy's. She hates how she has to feed on technos and wonders if she is truly human. Lucas brings a measure of light back into her life, and the return of Data 7 helps as well. Meglia bathes the fictional city of Meridiana in deep blacks, lots of shadows. He has a lot of stylization, especially with characters' hair, but it all gives them distinct silhouettes. Cybersix's outfit is reminiscent of pulp heroes like The Shadow. If I had anything to object to, it would be the somewhat regular scenes where Cybersix walks around her apartment naked. I don't have a problem with the nudity, but it never seems to serve the story. It's just something that happens. I've wondered if it was requested by the publishers. I say that because the comic book covers in Europe often featured nudity as well. There's a good chance that personally I'd have never heard of Cybersix if it wasn't for the cartoon adaptation which was made in English. Now, it was short-lived, but it was fantastic, and I want to talk about that adaptation for a minute. In September of 1999, Cybersix began airing as a cartoon in Canada on the Teletoon station and was licensed to other parts of the world, including showing up on Fox Kids in America. And just to be clear, this is the second time the comic was adapted into a TV show. The first was a live-action attempt in Argentina, but it was canceled quickly due to low ratings. Honestly, it looks pretty low budget, lower than what you can get away with for such an action-packed sci-fi show. The cartoon was co-produced by Canadian studio NOA and Japanese animation studio TMS. But this all begs the question, why was a European comic book created by South American creators built for an English-speaking audience? I mean, there was no existing fan base for English speakers since the comic book hadn't come out here. It also hadn't come out in Japan, who co-produced the animated cartoon. Well, the DVD series for Cybersix has commentary tracks, and there's two theories that are shared on there. The first is some of the people say that they think that one of the Japanese animation producers had seen the live-action show when he was visiting Buenos Aires and thought that the idea, at least, deserved to be turned into something bigger and better. I'm not sure about that one. The one that makes a little more sense to me is they say one of the French-Canadian producers had read the comic book and was trying to turn this into a cartoon for about 2 years. That strikes me as a little more believable that a French-Canadian person would have been exposed, for instance, to the French translations of Cybersix. Ultimately, it's all hearsay. Either way, the cartoon is fantastic. It only lasts for one season of 13 episodes, but the animation is top-notch. TMS, the animation studio, animated the second part of the Clayface episode from Batman the Animated Series' first season, for instance. That was pretty well regarded. And many TMS employees went on to found Spectrum Animation, which animated many of DC's animated shows. The show keeps artist Carlos Meglia's style, but features smooth fight scenes. It also tones down the violence and sexuality of the comics, which shouldn't surprise anyone. For instance, Lori in the comics is a delinquent. She looks awful, and in the cartoon, she's definitely smoothed out. In the comics, Cybersix will feed off of technos, but on the cartoon, she will defeat a fixed idea that then disappears and leaves behind a canister of sustenance. That doesn't exactly make sense, but it's also not a big change to the character or plot. The main enemy on the cartoon is Jose, the son of Dr. Von Richter, who commands an army of fixed ideas. He's portrayed as a bratty kid. This is a little different than the comic, which introduced him as a 32-year-old clone of Von Richter, who Von Richter put in a child's body so that he couldn't rebel against him. The cartoon either chooses not to address certain things or never got around to it in its 13 episodes. It doesn't delve into Jose being a clone, for example. The cartoon also works as an allegory for trans people. A lot of fans latched onto the fact that Cybersix is sometimes the superhero and sometimes Adrian without explanation. The comic, remember, featured Cybersix deciding to steal an identity to use as a way to hide. But the show never addresses that, and didn't do much with the Lucas romance, so some viewers interpret that as Cybersix using Adrian as her real identity. It's a valid interpretation. Perhaps it would have become more in line with the comic over time, but it only lasted a season. The exact reasons why have not been publicly discussed, but we do know that the show was very expensive, and also that the Canadian production company and Japanese animation studio were butting heads. Allegedly, the Japanese studio wanted to add more comedy, and the Canadian studio wanted to make the show darker like the comic, but that isn't confirmed. The show is very Monster of the Week, but it features gorgeous animation and likable characters. It was brief, but has grown a cult following over the years. Unlike the comics, the show is easily accessible, either as a full DVD set or you can stream it on TMS's YouTube channel. I recommend starting with the cartoon, and if you like that world and the ideas behind it, it's worth digging into the comic, which isn't as easy to find, but there's like 10 years of it to read, so there's a lot more material with the comic book. And who knows, maybe someday we'll get another adaptation of this material, and that might inspire some publisher somewhere to release an official English translated edition. I hope so. Then again, this was the subject of a lawsuit. Who knows if that makes it something that people want to stay away from, but let's briefly talk about what that lawsuit entailed. Cybersix aired on Fox Kids beginning in the fall of 1999. In the fall of 2000, Fox began airing a TV show called Dark Angel, produced by James Cameron and Charles Meglia. It was about a genetically enhanced girl, Max, who escapes her creators and moves to the city, working as a delivery person and fighting corrupt government agents. The Cybersix creators, Meglia and Trillo, believed it was too close to Cybersix to be a coincidence and filed a lawsuit. Unfortunately for them, they didn't have the funds to continue a protracted legal battle with the show and its producers, and it was dropped. There are some broad similarities between Cybersix and Dark Angel, but I'm not 100% convinced that it was intentional plagiarism. And part of the reason I'm not is the lawsuit never went far enough for there to be testimony and evidence that I can study. It's really just one person's word against another. I can watch the two things and see some broad similarities, but once you boil down to the specifics, I don't think it's really exactly the same, to be honest. We'll never really know, because both of the creators, unfortunately, are no longer with us, so there's really nobody left to talk about this. That said, I do recommend checking out Cybersix. It is very unique. It is a little hard to find. But then again, that's a big reason why I think a lot of us got into comic books. The fun of the hunt. Thanks so much for watching this episode with me. I had a blast looking back into Cybersix. It's been a while. Very unique comic and cartoon that I do recommend. I've got some fun stuff coming up real soon. If you want to support the show, just remember that it's easy to hit things like and subscribe. I always appreciate that. And for as little as $1 a month, you can support the show on Patreon. That's really what keeps this show going. Thank you so much to all of my amazing patrons. It means a lot to me. I'll see you next time. Until then, keep reading comics. All around, I hate how I stuttered at the end. On anthologies. And just to be clear, this is the second time the comic was on the, what are they called? Commentary tracks. From Batman the Animated Series first season. This is a little different than the comic, This is a little different than the comic, wow. So there's a lot more there. And then I keep losing my place. Produced by James Cameron and Charles. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider hitting like and subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, there are merchandise links beneath the YouTube video, and you can always hit join on YouTube or visit Comic Tropes on Patreon to get access to special perks.